Good afternoon, everybody. I just received the green light that we can start with this info day, and I would like to start by giving you all a very warm welcome to this info day. And it's good to see that we have people here in the room for the first time in the history of this building. We have a sort of pseudo physical face-to-face meeting on the info day, because over the past years, due to COVID, everything was virtual. And the warm welcome is extended also on behalf of our executive director, EMA Cook. She always reminds me that this building was actually designed to have meetings. It is to bring together people in the network and stakeholders, and to facilitate the work of the network. It's good to see that we have guests from the Commission here as well, not for the first time, because we've got Rocío participating in the CMDV and CVMP meetings. But again, first time that we have an official delegation here participating in the meeting. On today's program, I think that the Veterinary Medicinal Products Regulation has been applicable now for 1 year, and it's certainly been a year of transition for all of us, even though we cannot officially call it a year of transition. We had to make changes to our processes and learn new ways of working, and I'm pleased that together we continue to move towards realization of the benefits of the regulation it set out to achieve. You will have noticed that we are returning now to the traditional scheduling for the info day early in the year. And in the past years, we've had 2 info days every year. I'm not sure we will make it this year, but we may go for a thematic day, possibly on innovation as one of the topics. Like the innovation day we had now almost 5 years ago. And while at this time you can see that we still have a limited presence in the room, we hope that we can welcome more of you in person at the agency next year during the info day, because the info day has always been providing also an excellent opportunity to do networking, in addition to the TOPRA meeting that is at the end of the year, but info day being special in giving you the opportunity to also meet with the CVMP members and the CMDV members if they are present. We've organized this info day again to give you the latest information on regulatory policy, but we also make this a platform to listen to your experiences in this year of transition. And personally, I'm especially looking forward to the discussion on innovation tomorrow, as stimulating innovation is one of the main objectives of the regulation, and a dynamic innovation obviously also contributes to the availability of veterinary medicines in the European Union. And I've said it in the past meetings, also on regular occasions, if we really want to deal with bringing down the use of antimicrobials, we will need to see the development of products that can replace them for some occasions, not for everything, but certainly for some occasions. So innovation really should remain high on the agenda. The collaboration with industry stakeholders has been essential during the implementation, as it is also recognized by you and other stakeholders. And while we are all trying to implement pragmatic and practical solutions, we also have to recognize that we are all bound by the framework of the regulation. So we cannot go outside the regulatory framework. And in that context, it will remain a challenge to achieve the objectives set out by the regulation to reduce administrative and regulatory burden. So we can't bring it down to 0. There will always be, Rick, you already want to barge in on this one, so that's good to see. However, I'm positive that we will continue working together to ensure that the expected benefits of the regulation are delivered. For the meeting today, we've got about 1,100 participants registered to follow this event. I don't know how much are connected right now, but having 1,100 signals a continuing strong interest in both the work of the agency and collaboration, and the exchange on regulatory and scientific topics. And I think it's a good sign, and I mentioned it before as well, that this hybrid setting or the virtual setting does allow a lot of people to listen in directly and even to ask questions online, and to see, to improve that interaction. The reach out of this meeting has grown enormous if you compare it to having the face-to-face meetings alone. This year's program is structured around 2 sessions, and the first session will focus on regulatory policy, while the second session will cover practical aspects such as a focus on pharmacovigilance, but also include a more in-depth discussion on innovation in the EU. You will hear the views of the agency, industry speakers, and of the European Commission. And I hope that today's program will stimulate a lively exchange as usual. And I would now like to give the floor to Emily Drury, head of the newly established Regulatory Affairs and Referral Service in the Veterinary Medicines Division, who will chair the first session. Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivo, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to start with some housekeeping rules, which I don't think I'll manage to do as fast as the people who do the terms and conditions on the radio commercials, so I won't try, but I'll just take you through it. So the first thing is that the event is being recorded, and by participating through the WebEx, you are in fact agreeing to that. And so if by any chance you don't agree with that, then now is the moment to disconnect, and you could reconnect again via our broadcast, which is, I think, off our main EMA homepage, or at least via the Info Day event webpage, if you search for it through our website. All the presentations will be made available again on the Info Day event webpage on the EMA website in the coming days after the event, so you will have access to them. If you do experience audio issues during the event, then try the usual, exit the meeting, reconnect, and make sure you've got your correct audio device selected for the audio connection. But if you do experience issues, we've got an email address you can use, which is virtualmeetings, all one word, @ema.europa.eu. By default, all the attendees are muted. So when it comes to it, we will unmute you. So as Ivo said, the first session of the Info Day is on regulatory policy, and we're going to have 4 presentations from 4 different angles. So from the European Commission, from the EMA, from the CVMP, and then finally after the coffee break from the industry. And there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session, so after all 4 presentations have taken place. And but if we find we have a few minutes at the end of each presentation, we might take maybe 1 question at that point, but we'll see. And I'll take you through how to ask the questions. So if you've got WebEx open, you've got the chat box, which is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And when you type your question in there, make sure that you're sending the question to, you have to select everyone, because if you send it to an individual, we won't pick it up. And so you can put your question in there. And then when we take your question, and if you can also express your question verbally. And if you do that, then please put your hand up. And when we come to it, we will unmute you. So that's how to ask the questions when we come to it, and we'll go through it again later on. But I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is from the European Commission, and who is Dr. Alfonso Las Heras, who is Deputy Head of the D4 Unit for Veterinary Medicines within DG Sante. And as Ivo said, necessarily in the last few years, the EMA has collaborated very closely with that unit, which was previously the E5 unit, for the implementation of the regulation. So it's really great that they continue to support our Info Days. And by way of background, Alfonso has a veterinary and microbiological background and a very broad career experience spanning, I won't read them all, but biocides, GMOs, pesticides, feed additives, veterinary medicines, and I think implementation of some initiatives under the Green Deal. And he will now give a presentation with an overview of the Commission's activities in relation to the implementation of the regulation and, of course, the numerous implementing and delegated acts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily, for the floor, and good afternoon to everybody in the meeting room and also to those who are listening to us remotely. So first of all, please allow me to thank you, Emma, for inviting us to this Info Day. It's with great pleasure that we are coming to join this Info Day. And we would like also to thank you on behalf of my head of unit, Eva Zamora, who unfortunately was not available to join us today. So you will have to live with one of the last newcomers to the unit, since I only joined Unit D4 in November last year. but don't panic too much. I'm a bit familiar with this sector. I worked in it in the past, but I have to admit, and I want to be fully transparent with you, that there are still some difficult topics on which, as I was telling to the colleagues previously, I know a bit the music, but I don't know the lyrics by heart yet. So that's a bit still a learning process. And in that respect, I very much appreciate that I have been given the opportunity to join you, because it's going to be an opportunity to listen to the other speakers and to participate in the follow-up discussions. Next slide, please. When it comes to the outline of my presentation, and I really hope to stick to my 20 minutes, I'm going to go through a very short introduction, and then I think that what is more important for the audience today is to have a very quick overview of what has been done so far in terms of implementation of the new VMP regulation, but in particular to tell you a few words on where we are for a number of initiatives which are still ongoing in process for the full implementation of the new legislation. And finally, just a few final remarks, a few messages to take back home. Next slide, please. As a way of introduction, I think it could be a good opportunity to explain you where our unit is following the reorganization of DG Santé, which happened in October last year. As Emil said, our unit was formerly Unit E5. We were in Directorate E, Food and Feed Safety and Innovation. And since the reorganization, we moved, I think there is an effect on this slide, please, Sylvia. We moved from Directorate E to Directorate D. And what's important for you to know is that the unit was split, and the dossiers related to animal nutrition moved to Unit G5, so they are in Directorate G. And we were moved to Directorate D, medical products and innovation, where our unit has been put with other units dealing with human medicinal products and medical devices. There is another effect on this slide, please, Sylvia, where you can see the 4 units which are in this directorate, and our director, who is Ana Eva Ampelas. She's acting director for Directorate D, and we are still pending the nomination of a definitive director in future. So that's all about these few words on where we are in DG Santé, and then we can move to the next slide, please, to guide you through what we try to name as the implementation challenge, because following the publication of the VMP regulation, that was of course a huge milestone after the legislation procedure. But then we had to start this so-called implementation phase, where the VMP regulation tasked us with developing a number of implementing and delegated acts, some of which, and there is a bunch that was to be developed, to be adopted before the entry into application of the regulation. So this is a huge piece of work for the Commission, but not only for the Commission, for the whole regulatory network. Next slide, please. Because it's not only about developing and agreeing on new pieces of tertiary legislation, but at the same time, we had also to fix some errors, some important elements in the way, and you can certainly remember the issues on Article 152, to which I will come later, and also to address some elements and some matters of interpretation, which is a kind of ongoing task that continues to be relevant nowadays. Next slide, please. When it comes to the progress made, I don't want to be exhaustive in my presentation. We have also included, for information purposes, the list of the 17 legal measures that we have adopted so far, so that you have all them with the clear legal references and ordered in chronological order. But in this slide, we want to provide you with a wide overview of what has been done so far. And you see all the measures which have been adopted under the umbrella, which are really implementing or delegated acts. We don't need to name them all. And on the top side, both on the right and on the left sides, you have two elements that were a bit somehow unexpected, which are not implementing or delegated acts, but co-decisions that the Commission had to propose and to adopt in order to contribute to the implementation of the VMP regulation. And namely, again, we had to develop in record time this standalone regulation on the transitional measures for packaging and labeling in relation to Article 152. But we also had to amend the official controls regulation in order to implement the provisions in Article 118 of the VMP regulation. So these were two additional pieces of work that were quite challenging, and somehow we managed to do it in quite a record time. And I have also added, sorry, just on the previous slide, on the right side, another thing which is not an implementing, neither a delegated act, which is this report based on Article 156 of the VMP regulation regarding the feasibility study on the ERA monographs. Next slide, please. Here you have 3 slides that we can move on very quickly with all the legal acts which have been already published, but we are not going to spend time on those. So next slide, please, Silvia, and the next one. And just if you move to the next one, among those elements that have been already published, I wanted to say just a few words on these transitional rules regarding packaging and labeling. And this is not because I want to remember the, let's say, lively and complex days we lived at the time when we had to develop this regulation, but just to focus on one of the elements that were critical to develop these transitional rules, which was the time needed to process all the necessary variations to adapt to the new labeling conditions in the regulation. Next slide. And the objective is just to, not to warn, but at least to make it clear that we were given ourselves 5 years, to complete this task. 1 year is already over, and we would like to underline the need to ensure that there is a well-planned submission of the relevant variations, both by industry, but also for the purposes of the assessment of those variations by the competent authorities. So the key message is that we need to avoid that there is also something like an unintended situation at the end of this transition period. Next slide, please. Another element that we have already published by now is this report that was required to the Commission in Article 156 of the VMP regulation regarding the feasibility study of these ERA monographs. If you look at the overall conclusions of the report, it concludes that there are the monograph system has some merits which might contribute to achieve the objectives in the VMP regulation to ensure a high level of environmental protection. But at the same time, it points to a number of elements which do not advise for an immediate implementation of the monograph system. And among those elements, just I wanted to name these two which are in the slide, is that, okay, we are still implementing the VMP regulation. This is a very demanding task for all the actors in the regulatory network, for the Commission, for the agency, for the national competent authorities, and also for industry. And just amending the legislation and trying to implement this might represent an additional huge task for the network, which might have some other collateral effects. So that's on the one side, on the more operational side. But at the same time, when it comes to the substance, we know that there are some ongoing reflections on the human medicine side. And I think that it makes sense to try to align these two reflections, two processes, in order to find an alignment and to find a common approach which would be also in line with this spirit of the one substance, one assessment. In the end, we have some common substances, and when it comes to environmental risk assessment, there should be some synergies and some mutually beneficial effects if this element is considered at a later stage in future, once there is more clarity on what's going to happen in the human side. Next slide. So that's a bit a quick overview about the main elements which have been achieved so far in terms of implementation. And perhaps what is more interesting for you to know about is where we are with a number of initiatives which are ongoing at this moment in time. So next slide, please, Silvia. Again, in this slide, you can see a very, let's say, broad representation of what is in progress now, just below the umbrella. But we have also added a few elements on the margins. So on the left side, you also have a couple of initiatives on which we are going to start our work this year. In particular, these implementing acts regarding small immediate packaging units and also abbreviation and pictograms, for which we don't need to ask for an EMA's advice. So we expect to start the work this year and to try to make progress over the year 2023. On the right side, you will see a number of initiatives for which we don't have a legal deadline for adoption in the VMP regulation, and on which we haven't started to work on yet. So now let's have a closer look at those initiatives which are work in progress at this moment. So Silvia, please, next slide. Let's say start by the package of the lists. I think that in this regulation we have a number of lists to be developed. We have already developed the one on the antimicrobials to be reserved for treatments in humans, but we are still aiming to develop these 3 other lists. When it comes to the list of antimicrobials not to be used outside the terms of the marketing authorization or subject to some specific conditions, even if there is no deadline for adoption in the VMP regulation, the work already started a while ago in the context of other actions related to antimicrobial resistance. And we know that colleagues at EMA are working and have made good progress in the preparation of this scientific advice. So this is something to come in the near future. When it comes to the list of substances for food-producing aquatic species referred to in Article 114.3 of the VMP regulation, we have a deadline by 2027, and we can tell you that at this moment we are preparing the draft mandate to EMA so that colleagues can receive this mandate and also try to plan their work well in advance. And finally, within this bunch of lists, we have also to develop, in accordance with Article 115.5 of the VMP regulation, this list of substances which are essential for equine species or which might bring an additional clinical benefit to those species. The deadline for this implementing act is in 2025. And the mandate has been already sent to EMA colleagues, and we expect their scientific advice by March next year. So that's something which has been already framed, and as far as I know, the colleagues at EMA are also making good progress in terms of selecting the experts and so on. So next slide, please. Another important piece of legislation is this implementing act on GMPs for VMP and active substance, which also has broad scope and might also need to set some conditions for this herd-specific vaccines and so on and so forth. So it's a quite a complex piece of legislation. The mandate was already sent to EMA last year, and we know that experts in the expert group are working heavily on this, and there have been already 15 meetings in that respect. So this is work in progress at EMA by now. Then we also have, in accordance with Article 106.6 of the VMP regulation, to develop a delegated act for VMPs which are administered orally to animals by routes other than medicated feed. The EMA's advice was already delivered in 2020, and we have already started the preparatory work with member states in the expert group on veterinary medicinal products. We had the first meeting on 1st December last year. We collected feedback from the member states. We are working internally within the Commission services, and we expect to have the next round on a more mature draft in the month of March. So that's also another important piece of work, which is linked obviously with any veterinary medicinal product to be used orally, but which of course may have an impact from the AMR perspective as well. Next slide, please. Within this slide, we have packed what we could call the Article 118 package. This is a very, let's say, interesting provision in the VMP regulation, which is not only about setting conditions on VMPs, how VMPs are prescribed, used, manufactured, but it also goes a bit further and sets rules regarding imports of animals and products of animal origin. And that's the reason why we had to amend the official controls regulation in order to allow for the standard control systems in the EU to also apply to these provisions in the VMP regulation. There are two consecutive steps in this implementation work. First, we have to adopt a delegated act, which has been already discussed with the member states at expert group level. We have already gone through the public consultation and also the WTO SPS consultation with third countries. And then the next steps will be, of course, the adoption by the Commission. As for any delegated act, then we have to go through the objection period by Council and Parliament, which could be between 2 and 4 months if either Parliament or Council ask for an extension of the objection period, and then that could be the publication of the delegated act. But this delegated act is very much linked to a couple of implementing acts that we have to adopt on the legal basis of the official controls regulation, which is about the listing of third countries which will be allowed to export animals or products of animal origin to the European Union, and also which kind of attestation has to be included in the existing health certificates in order to attest that these conditions in the delegated act are fulfilled. So we are working on these implementing acts, but of course you may understand that until the delegated act, which sets the import requirement, has not gone through the objection period and it is finally published, we cannot proceed to the next formal steps. Next slide, please. So here you have the reference in our website where you can follow the different steps of both delegated and implementing acts. You will have access to the request for advice to EMA, to the scientific advices where available, and to the different procedural steps for every individual measure. Next slide. When it comes to work in progress, in addition to the implementing and delegated acts, I just wanted to mention very briefly a couple of elements regarding other non-legislative actions. We have to prepare a report to Parliament and Council on the use of VMPs in equine species and their exclusion from the food chain. We are working on it. We expect to have a study launched very soon this year, which will be the basis for this report to Parliament and Council. Next slide, please. We have also launched a couple of supporting actions with budget from the Single Market Programme Food Strand to support fighting against antimicrobial resistance. In particular, there will be grants to support member states for data collection And we also are working on a training scheme just to try to inform vets and farmers working with food producing animals about the new elements in the VMP regulation, but also aiming at sharing best practices between professionals from different member states. And the intention is that these trainings could start late in this year or beginning next year. Next slide, please. We are also working on the revision of the notice to applicants. I think that this is an important piece of work, not only because of the work involved for the Commission and the member states in the expert group, but also because this will provide additional elements of interpretation of some new provisions in the VMP regulation. For the time being, 4 meetings have been held so far, and apparently the progress and the peace in the subgroup of the expert group is good, and we will be able to provide further information on this at a later stage. Next slide, please. As you might also know, there is an ongoing revision of the EMA fees system. The Commission adopted its proposals by mid-December, and the discussions have started very recently at the Council Working Party under the Swedish presidency of the EU. You will get the presentation, and you will be able to follow the developments of this discussion in the website of the Commission through this hyperlink. So I think that with this we come to the final remarks. Next slide, please. And I think that the first thing that I would like to underline or to stress is that a lot of work is still ongoing, a lot of implementation work, and that this is a key priority for the European Commission, so that we can put in place all the instruments foreseen in the regulation which are necessary to achieve the objectives of this new regulation. But at the same time, we also would like to adapt and to mention that we are in the middle of an adaptation process to a new system, to a new legislation, and things take time for all the actors in the regulatory network, not only for industry, for national competent authorities, for the agency, for the Commission, and for everybody. So we need time to adapt and to also overcome, and this is related to the third point, some practical issues that we are discovering on the day-to-day practical implementation of the provisions of the VMP regulation, which may reveal elements which could be optimized and improved over time. And I count on everybody's willingness to try to contribute and to improve these few elements. In a nutshell, we do believe and we do hope that once the full implementation phase has been finished, once everybody has adapted to this new system, to this new legislation, and these practical issues have been fine-tuned, we are confident that in a few, I was about to say months, but rather years from now, the VMP regulation will be, let's say, reaching its full potential to deliver on the key political and policy objectives that we all agreed on in it. So that's all. Next slide, please. I would like, again, on behalf of my colleagues in the European Commission, to thank you all, EMA colleagues, the national competent authorities, all the stakeholders involved in this implementation work, for your commitment, for your help to make this implementation phase a common success. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfonso. And I think this gives us a very good overview of the enormous work that is going on in a way behind the scenes, and how all the pieces of the puzzle will fit together. We'll move straight on to the next presentation, which is the EMA retrospective into 1 year of the first regulation. And this will be presented by Dr. Ivo Claesson. And he's very well placed to do this because he's been overseeing the implementation within the EMA since he joined as head of the veterinary division in 2018. These days, however, he's equally deputy executive director of the agency and involved in numerous key strategies on regulatory science and big data. And prior to that, he has a long international career in vaccine research, development and production, and he was also a CVMP member for some years, but I won't say when. Thank you, Ivo.
It was when you were still in kindergarten. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And actually, I would like to go back a bit more than just a year into the VMP rec, because if you put on the next slide, you'll see a flashback to 2019. When it was decided that when the program started, that was going to deliver on the IT system. So my focus will be, and I hope this will be actually the last time that I present on the IT systems that we have developed to support the VMP rec. And Alfonso, I'd like to thank you for giving an excellent overview of all the other work that we're doing in terms of providing advices to the Commission, so I will not repeat that. And next year, I promise you, I will bring a different message at the Info Day. But I think it's good to look back at the VMP rec program that was established to deliver the IT systems required by the regulation. Not to say that the work is now done, but to say, okay, where did we start? What was or from the outset, what were we intending to do? And what have we delivered in the meantime? We had to start this in the midst of the pandemic, and the program success in those days remained a priority for the agency. We had two big programs at the time. One was the Clinical Trials Information System on the human side, and the other one was the VMP rec system on the veterinary side. I must say that excellent collaboration was key to the success, both with the national competent authorities. We had the HMA task force on the coordination of the implementation of the vet regulation. That task force has now stopped. It has ceased to exist. It's no longer needed. And HMA has decided to establish a veterinary strategic focus group, which will replace the task force as well as ESS, and hopefully will help the network to provide more strategic guidance, a strategic direction in the future. But also the collaboration with the pharmaceutical industry, Animal Health Europe and Access VetMed, and the Association of Veterinary Consultants. We saw the name change of the ACVP to Access VetMed in the past year. I had to get used to that new name, but it works. And with the veterinarians in Europe, which is very important because they are, whatever way you look at it, they are one of our most important stakeholders. The way we started in 2019, if I can get the next slide, please, is we started with a program vision. And I would like to, I'm not sure if you are familiar with this document, but the program vision described high level what we intended to deliver and also how we were going to deliver that. So the program vision was regulation mandated by the European Medicines Agency, the agency in collaboration with the member state to deliver the following IT systems. The Union Product Database, I don't need to explain to you what it is, the Union Pharmacovigilance Database, a Union database on manufacturing and wholesale distribution, and the collection of sales and use data of antimicrobials in animals. Those were the four key systems, of which the Union Product Database, which contains all the master data, of course, is one of the most important things. And in that program vision, I'm going to dive in now, for the Union Product Database, we set at the time, we set the following. So the regulation calls for the establishment of the Union Product Database to store and make available information of different types of authorized veterinary medicinal products at a union level, but meaning all the authorized veterinary medicinal products that are in the Union. And some of the key features to be delivered by the database, following directly from the regulation, are support the storage and management of product updates that may or may not require formal assessment by the regulator. And this includes both variations not requiring assessment and certain variations requiring assessment. Provide information on the authorization status and availability of veterinary medicinal products. Collect information on the annual volume of sales of veterinary medicinal products that can be reused then for pharmacovigilance and can be reused also for antimicrobial sales collection of data, and make this information available to other systems for analytical purposes. enable the exchange of veterinary medicinal product information with other systems in a structured format, and make available an application programming interface and a graphical user interface for users to view, create, and manage product data, and support good data quality and data consistency across IT systems, especially between the UPD and regular IT systems. And if we can get one more click on this slide, and I thank the people who prepared this presentation. What it shows here in green is what we have actually delivered in the time. And what it shows here in orange is what we haven't delivered or haven't delivered fully. For example, on availability, the volume of sales and availability status reporting will be fully functional this in Q1 2023. So we didn't deliver it at the start of the going into application of the regulation, but a year later. Also, the integration with the pharmacovigilance database, which was scheduled for is now scheduled for the second half of 2023. But we did deliver the minimal viable scope because the legislative requirement for that is in 2024, actually. And the support of the good data quality is partially through validation rules and control data, but support will continue to 2023 to improve the data quality. We all recognize that data quality is extremely important for the proper functioning of the UPD. And if I can move to the next slide, please. On the pharmacovigilance system, which is another system mandated by the regulation, is the Union Pharmacovigilance Database, required to store and make available information of suspected adverse events for all veterinary medicinal products authorized in the Union. And again, this is taken from the vision that was established in 2019. The key features support the storage and management of adverse event reaction reports, including reports on suspected lack of efficacy, as well as adverse effects on the environment. Store and make available the outcomes of the signal management process, and we'll hear more about the signal management process tomorrow in the presentation. Make available information on QPPV and pharmacovigilance master file. Make available results of pharmacovigilance inspections. Enable the exchange of information with other systems in a structured format. System will be interconnected, not integrated, but interconnected with the Union product database, making use of the master data available in the UPD and in SPOR. And make available an application programming interface again and a graphical user interface. And if we click again, same principle applies. Whatever is green has been delivered. And you see nothing orange here in this slide. So I think we did deliver, and this is the situation January 2022. We did deliver on that minimal viable product. But we're still continuing to develop the database further to provide more functionality and more stability. Can I have the next slide, please? The manufacturers and wholesale database and the antimicrobial sales and use data collection. One database to be developed, and the regulation calls for a collection of data on sales and use of antimicrobials in animals and make that information available. And it should enhance the quality and consistency of product data by using agreed standards and controlled vocabularies, and enable users to view analytical data on the sales and use of antimicrobials. So very much becoming a real-time system, but certainly a system that is transparent also to the public. And can I have the next click, please? Because we did deliver that Union database in manufacturing and wholesale distribution, and that product is now completed and handed over to maintenance. And on the ASU, as we call it, it's on schedule to be delivered the end of 2023, beginning 2024, as it is required in the legislation. So we are on track. I can't claim that we have delivered it yet, but certainly we're moving in the right direction. If we can have the next slide, please. These were some of the guiding principles that we set out on how we would deliver on the program. So first bullet point, and I've stressed this in all the meetings that I've been to, the IT systems within the scope of this program must be developed in alignment with the legal requirements arising from the regulation, the supporting implementing act, which was more specific, as well as any other legislative requirements that apply. And where possible and feasible and in line with the required functionalities, the new system will be developed using already existing system components like SPORE or system components currently under development in the EU telematics network. The new IT systems must be developed avoiding duplication of data input across systems, both for marketing authorization holders as well as for national competent authorities, which are in scope of the VMP REC program to ensure that there's a single source for each type of information, also to prevent divergence or different information on the same topic being available in the individual systems. And a phased approach for the development based on agile principles shall be considered in order to prioritize functionalities that enable legislative compliance first, the so-called minimal viable product, and thereafter prioritization and functionality shall be done in collaboration with the member states. And how well did we adhere to these guiding principles? If I can have one more click, please. We have to admit that not all legislative requirements have been delivered. Some were not due yet, and very few have been delayed. We haven't been able to do it. So we won't claim full success there. Second and the third bullet point, I think this is the way that we worked. And when you look at prioritizing functionalities that enable legislative compliance first, the principle was not entirely rigorously applied. I mean, it has been a leading principle, but for reasons that I won't dwell into, we've made other choices during the process. Can I have the next slide, please? What did we do to support the implementation of the VMP REC of the IT systems? We had an extensive change management, including frequent communications through events, webinars, training, and targeted help desk and contact points. We were always in close contact with the European Commission to obtain clarifications and to provide guidance to the network and industry. And in fact, the governance at the management board level was led, or was at least chaired by the Commission. All procedures adapted to new changed legislative requirements and procedural guidance on the EMA website were updated. Most scientific guidelines have been updated as necessary. We drafted 12 technical scientific advices to be delivered to the European Commission, which were also presented by Alfonso, to support the development of secondary legislative acts, and 3 of those advices are still ongoing. And we've got new requests, new mandates coming in. And with intense regulatory affairs support to all areas, internal and internal stakeholders. Next slide, please. So today, looking at what we have delivered. So the major regulatory changes were aiming towards better administration in the European Union. The VMP REC program delivered on time. 3 IT systems were going live since January 28th in 2022. And the UPD is the first central database on veterinary medicinal products. It's also the first network IT system compatible with ISO IDMP. And improvements are still ongoing to improve its usability, user satisfaction, as well as data quality in that system. For pharmacovigilance, the Union Pharmacovigilance Database has been established. It's connected to the UPD. It is compliant with VICH standards. And we are currently piloting new procedures for signal management from the side of the national competent authorities and the agency. On the manufacturers and wholesale database, UDRA GMDP aligned with veterinary requirements because there were veterinary requirements in the regulation. But also in connection to the UPD, we now have the first public website with information on all veterinary medicines authorized in the European Union. And I think this is when you look at the totality of the work that has been delivered in a very short period of time, and the actual upload of the legacy data, and Jana will give a bit more information on that in her presentation. I think it's an impressive piece of work that could only be delivered through good collaboration and through careful scope management. So if I can go to the next slide, please. Today on pharmacovigilance, the last periodic safety update reports for centrally authorized products were concluded in June 2022. Signal management pilot is being reviewed and intended to be less resource intensive, more effective process. And as said, there will be a presentation on that tomorrow. We will increase monitoring and antimicrobial sales and use. The project is initiated and is delivered according to schedule, and the first submission under the new rules will be in 2024. The program overall has paved the way for continuous improvements in functionality and data quality, and the reduction in administrative burden is expected to materialize after the current change transition period. And where exactly that reduction in administrative burden will be felt remains to be seen, but ideally it's for all stakeholders. Next slide, please. What's next? Next slide. So what have we learned since 2019 from this project? From this project, we've learned that scope management is key. The focus was on must-have functionalities and not to dwell in the nice-to-have functionalities. If we'd done that, we would not have delivered, we would have had nothing, we would have been here empty-handed. Collaboration, delivered together with the network, industry and veterinary professionals, has been very important, as well as expectation management as, I would say, a continuous exercise. Because not all benefits will be realized immediately. We knew that from the start, we know it now. And everyone needs to learn how to operate in the new normal. The VMP REC program paved the way for continued improvement in functionality and data quality. And the focus should be on usability and added value in prioritization of ongoing improvements over the next years. And I'm not trying to deny that there still are problems, challenges, huge challenges, but I'm convinced that we will overcome them in the coming years. We have closed the VMP REC program as such. And there were two reasons for that. First, I think it was good to close the program, but we were moving into what is called a new agile governance for IT projects at the agency level and at the level of the telematics projects in the member states. And this provides you an overview of how that new agile governance will work. And I will not dwell into details, but where before there was a single program governing all the veterinary IT systems, these IT systems, individual IT systems, are now in different value streams. And you see the big value stream here. And actually, the Union Product Database is in the value stream that has to do with life cycle management, whereas the pharmacovigilance and the antimicrobial sales and use project are in the value stream that is dedicated to post-authorization monitoring. And that makes sense. To make sure that we prioritize in the right way and in collaboration with the stakeholders, we've established the Veterinary System Improvement Advisory Group, so the VSIAG. And in this VSIAG, which is a direct result from what is written in the legislation for UPD, we have representatives of marketing authorization holders, as well as the industry, as animal healthcare professionals, member states, commission, and the agency. And you see them in this slide. It is a group where stakeholders can raise and discuss requirements and where prioritization can take place at functionality level. The kickoff meeting on this was held in April 2022, but it's fully operational since autumn 2022, and that also gave us the opportunity to close the old program. The outcome of this veterinary, of the VSIAG, will then go into the decisions that are taken here internally in the agency on prioritization, and that happens in portfolio board and subsequently in the value streams for the actual delivery of these programs, of these projects. And you see below that we have VSIAG members from all these areas, and they are collectively responsible for indeed making sure that now that we've finished the current stage, that we can continue to develop. It's for the agency to ensure that continuous budget is available and that it's being prioritized in relation to the other projects and programs that are ongoing. And I think this was my last slide, actually. No, there's one more. Obviously, it's good to collect all these data and to have all these data available, but only collecting data and not doing anything with it, even though some regulatory processes are being supported, is not bringing a full benefit of having all these data and maintaining all these data. Because I think we should not underestimate the resource input that maintaining good quality data in a database needs, both from the sides of the industry as well as from the regulators. So in 2020, 2021, we started to develop a veterinary big data strategy, which was aiming at also using these data in different ways and combining them with other data sources. So we have had until now 2 workshops with stakeholders on veterinary big data, and we're now gradually moving from strategy to action. And this goes alongst the 3 pillars of actionable work streams that you see here, which is analytics discoverability, governance and literacy, and stakeholder engagement. And I will not dwell into it, other than to say that we are currently looking into establishing a data catalog of all data sources that could be beneficial outside the existing data that we already have, that could be beneficial for the actual authorization and use of veterinary medicinal products. And we'll keep you informed on that progress in the next big data info meeting, stakeholder meeting. And with that, I would like to close my presentation and give back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Ivo, for that whistle-stop tour of the infrastructure and processes that we've been putting in place to move product lifecycle management and the post-authorization activities within the framework of the new regulation. Before we move on to the next presentation, I'd just like to remind everybody online that you will take questions after the 4th presentation, after the coffee break. But you could already start sending in questions via the WebEx chat, and that is in the box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And if you just make sure that you send the message to everyone, not to any individuals, then we can pick it up and already start looking through them. So I think moving to the next perspective, we, as well as obviously the IT processes and databases, we have the scientific guidelines and activities of the CVMP and its working parties, which need to support the requirements and the opportunities that are offered by the regulation. And we're very grateful to have the CVMP chair, Dr. Johan Skeffeli, who's here fresh from the CVMP meeting this week to provide an overview of the CVMP's work plan for this year and beyond. And just by way of background, Johan was a long-standing member of the CVMP, previously also vice chair, and he has an extensive experience within the Dutch Medicines Evaluation Board as a safety assessor, and notably for consumer safety. And he brings this expertise also to the international fora such as VICH and JECFA. So thank you, Johan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome also from my side to everybody here in the room and also online. Can I have my first slide, please? So today I will give you an overview of what the CVMP will do in the coming year and thereafter. But first of all, this is actually my very first Veterinary Medicines Info Day as the chair of the CVMP. So I thought it would be nice to say something about myself and shortly introduce myself. So I'm from the Netherlands. I'm a toxicologist, biologist by education. My main focus as toxicologist has indeed been on consumer safety, and that includes, of course, residues of veterinary drugs in food. I've been a member of the CVMP since 2007, vice chair since 2019, and in June last year I became chair. And well, I have to say it's really an honor to be the chair of the CVMP. The CVMP plays a very important role within the regulatory network in the Union. And I believe that the most important value of the CVMP is that it is a scientific committee. So I find it of great importance and also see it as my role as chair, is that we continue to bring good science to the assessments. We can see that there are many new scientific developments in the veterinary field, leading also to novel therapies, for example. And therefore, it's crucial for the CVMP that we keep pace with the evolving science. In the next slides, I will also show you how we are achieving this. And of course, this will ultimately support the innovation, which is one of the key objectives of the regulation. So the role of the CVMP has its basis in the legislation. So it's exactly clear what we do. And in summary, the CVMP undertakes assessment related activities related to the centralized procedure. We also assess nationally authorized products that are referred to the CVMP for harmonized position. And we do the scientific assessment of the MRL applications. Also, the CVMP contributes to product development by providing scientific advice and also by contributing to international harmonization through, for example, the VICH. The CVMP cannot do this work without its working parties. They are very important to us. You see them in the picture on the right-hand side of the screen. Two of those are actually joint working parties with the colleagues from the human medicines. Those are the Quality Working Party and the Joint 3Rs Working Party. On the bottom of the slide, you see actually two working groups at agency level. Those are the Inspectors Working Group and a new group, and that's the ISUA VET, and that's a group that collects data on sales and use of antimicrobials, and I will come back to that group in a later slide. Yeah, next slide, please. So in order to fulfill our role, we make work plans. And in the next slides, I will give you an overview of the work plan of 2023. These are just the highlights. So if you want to see the details, you can find the work plan on the EMA website. Today, I will skip the pharmacovigilance part because these activities are in the work plan, but there is a dedicated session on that tomorrow morning. The CVMP work plan is founded on the EMA Regulatory Science to 2025, on the European Medicines Agency's Network Strategy to 2025, and of course on the Veterinary Regulation. Next slide, please. So speaking about the regulation, as you know, we've been operating under 2019/6 for more than a year now. And that has the overall aim of achieving better regulation in the EU. And to actually achieve that, it is also important that everybody, within their own role and possibilities, will strive to contribute to the overall objectives of the regulation. And this is, of course, also relevant for the CVMP, and you will certainly see those objectives reflected in the activities of the work plan. The next slide, please. One of the areas in the work plan is to support product development and innovation. And on the screen, you see two guidelines that are currently under development, and both are in the consultation phase. The first one on the left is the guideline on the potency tests for veterinary cell-based therapies and the relation to clinical efficacy. And that consultation is almost ending. The end date is 28 February. The other guideline on the right is about quality, safety, and efficacy of veterinary medicinal products designed for phage therapy. And the consultation for this guideline is open until 31 May. Well, these two guidelines are on very new topics and have been developed by the Novel Therapies and Technologies Working Party that became operational 1 year ago and is chaired by Dr. Jacqueline Poot. This working party actually works with separate operational expert groups for each individual topic. And these operational expert groups are composed of scientists with specific expertise in the relevant areas. And with this way of working, we really draw in additional expertise on new areas and further extend the scientific capacity and capability of the CVMP. Of course, your comments are very important to us, so please do provide your input during the consultation periods. Okay, the next slide, please. So what are the other activities relating to product development and innovation? First of all, there's the reflection paper on Article 40.5. This is about the additional data protection for innovation on existing products. The consultation is open until 28 February. Again, your input is highly appreciated. And then we will work on 2 new items this year. One is on the development of guidance on data requirements for quality, safety and efficacy for VMPs containing non-degradable nanomaterials. This is again a new area for which a new operational expert group with relevant experts has just been composed this week. The other activity is the development of guidance for allergen products for use in horses, dogs and cats. Furthermore, we will work on guideline revisions for DNA vaccines and for live recombinant vector vaccines. The one for DNA vaccines was adopted for public consultation this week, so you will see that coming on the website. We will contribute to VSCH guidance on monoclonal antibodies, and of course our scientific advice procedure is there specifically to support product development and innovation. Next slide, please. Then on product availability and limited markets. We have a couple of activities relating to supporting availability of medicines, in particular for limited markets. The work plan accommodates for further development and implementation of eligibility criteria, if needed, and that's eligibility to Article 23. And in this respect, I would like to highlight to you that the eligibility is mostly focusing on the benefit side, so which is assessed according to whether the product is for a serious or life-threatening disease, and whether it will serve an unmet medical need. And as you know, there is a reflection paper on this topic, and now that we are actually getting hands-on experience with such eligibility request, we will assess if there's a need for a revision of that reflection paper. Another important topic is how do we handle the limited market products that are not eligible for Article 23? These products will need to comply with Article 8 of the regulation, which is a full application. However, we are looking for possibilities within the Annex 2, so the flexibilities. And you will understand that this needs careful consideration, consultations with the legal department and with the Commission. Nevertheless, we are making progress and we hope to finalize the set of guidelines around the summer of this year. Next slide. So yeah, here I would like to share with you the experience that we have so far with the Article 23 eligibility requests. Under the new legislation, up to now, we have received 27 requests in total, and in fact, all of them were considered to be limited market, either because the product was for a minor species or because the product was for the treatment or prevention of diseases that occur infrequently or in limited geographical areas. You can see the numbers on the screen. I have to say that on the last column in 2023 is actually only January, because this month we didn't receive any requests. Of the 27 requests in total, 15 were considered eligible for Article 23, 12 were not. And you can see the breakdown into chemicals, into vaccines and other biologicals. Next slide, please. In relation to activities to support product authorization, I would like to highlight a few points there. The first is that the guidance on Article 34 has been finalized. Article 34 is about the prescription status. And this guideline aims to contribute to a harmonized application of the criteria mentioned in this article throughout the network. Another activity is the revision of the CVMP recommendation on the benefit risk. And this is an ongoing activity that will continue in 2023. And furthermore, we would like to write a question and answer document on the classification of VMPs as biological, other than immunological, as immunological, or other than biological, sorry, based on the experience gained over the past year. Next slide, please. Right, over to antimicrobial resistance then. This has become a really important topic in the veterinary regulation. But as you know, for the CVMP, it has been an important topic since many years. We have these 5 years strategies on antimicrobials. And as you can read here, in these strategies, it is the CVMP's mission to ensure the availability of effective antimicrobial medicines for the treatment of infectious diseases of animals, while at the same time minimizing the risks to animals, humans, and the environment arising from their use. Next slide. As I already indicated on one of my first slides, there is a new working group at the agency, and that group is called the European Sales and Use of Antimicrobials for Veterinary Medicine Working Group, and has the acronym ESUA-VET-WG. This group is needed for the task mentioned in the veterinary regulation. It will collect data on sales and use of antimicrobials, and it will contribute to GIACRA. This is a cooperation between the EMA, the EFSA, and the ECDC. And it also provides the CVMP with advice on related matters as needed. The call for members is currently in progress, and the group composition will be based on a member state representation to establish a good connection between this group and the member states where the data is actually collected. Other activities relating to antimicrobial resistance. Well, the list of antimicrobials reserved for human use is finalized last year. And that is on the next slide, sorry. And we're also working on the list of antimicrobials with restrictions for use under the cascade, with the aim to finalize this before the summer. This year we will also work on the guideline on risk assessment for veterinary antimicrobials. And then there will be 2 topics for which there will be a change. The first is related to our initial idea to develop criteria for exceptional cases where and prophylaxis would be accepted for antimicrobials, and we had further internal reflections on this topic, and we finally decided that this topic will not be progressed further by the CVMP. The other topic with a change is related to the intended guidance on potential claims for products that can contribute to the reduction of the need for antimicrobials, and we decided that this topic is too broad for one guideline, and therefore the related issues will be addressed in the benefit risk guideline and in product type specific guidelines, such as the one on phage therapy that I spoke about. The next slide, please. So more work on antimicrobial resistance. This year, the CVMP will work on the guideline on post-authorization studies for antimicrobials. Also, the CVMP will produce a reflection paper on the availability and characteristics of diagnostic tests. And finally, we will start research on possibilities to review and adjust the label dose of the older veterinary antibiotics, starting with compiling a list of candidate products for which this could be relevant. And also for this topic, your input is most welcome. Next slide, please. Okay, we're coming now to the area of environmental risk assessment. There are a couple of activities in relation to this. First of all, and you see it on the screen, there's the reflection paper on the environmental risk assessment of ectoparasiticidal veterinary medicinal products used in cats and dogs. There's quite a lot of scientific development in this particular field, and that is captured in this reflection paper. Public interest in this area is also growing. The consultation is open to 31 March, and we would greatly appreciate your comments on this reflection paper. Other activities on environmental risk assessment include the guideline for VMPs used in aquaculture, the revision of the reflection paper on risk mitigation measures, and a new but important topic, the risk of antimicrobial resistance in the environment. Addressing this risk is required according to the legislation, but we have currently no methodology for it, so that needs to be developed. Next slide, please. Then on consumer safety, you may be aware of this EMA EFSA report on a harmonized approach to human dietary exposure. This was published in the last quarter of 2022. The European Commission wants EMA and EFSA to use a common approach in the dietary exposure calculations. And as you know, the CVMP has always used the standard food basket in the context of the setting of MRLs. But EFSA uses real food consumption data. And that needs to become one common approach for both agencies. And there's a high likelihood that in the future, the CVMP will move away from the use of the standard food basket. Therefore, in this year, we will assess the possible impact on this on our work around setting of MRLs and also on the existing MRLs. Next slide, please. The work plan also contains a chapter about reinforcing the scientific and regulatory capacity and capability of the network. The quality of scientific review process is key to our task, particularly for the CVMP. And what is also essential to us is stakeholder engagement, and therefore this is also included in our work plan. Next slide. The agency's vision on stakeholder engagement is that we introduce systematic and structured stakeholder engagement at the domain level to underpin strategic priority planning and individual guideline generation and revision. And to achieve this, we have planned for an interested parties meeting. This meeting will take place on 24 May, so save the date. And today and tomorrow is, of course, the Veterinary Medicines Info Day. And in addition, we will ask for your input on the development of the strategic 3 years work plan of the veterinary domain. And this is a new concept aimed at strategic planning. And of course, it is important to have your views to understand if we are working on the right topics. And finally, there's of course the public consultation for all concept papers, all guidelines, all reflection papers. And this is also an important element of stakeholder engagement. Last slide. I come to conclusion now. So we have an ambitious work plan. There are still some challenges relating to the implementation of the regulation, but I think our focus must be on the opportunities and realizing meaningful benefits, which are support of innovation, product development and availability, increase efficiency of the processes, to adopt a more effective risk-based approach, and to foster proportionate decision making while promoting and protecting animal health, public health, and the environment. And finally, I want to emphasize that there is a need for continued active stakeholder engagement. And I think that's my last slide. Yes. So that concludes my overview of the CVMP work plan, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Johan. And I have to say, and I think we can all see that the amount of work on the new and updated guidelines that the CVMP is constantly churning out is quite staggering. And I think one day we'll have to have a reflection paper to reflect how we did this on top of the normal assessment work. Of course, it's not just the scientific considerations, it's how it fits within the regulatory framework. It's not always clear, and that ties in with some of the points in Alfonso's presentation, which is we have a lot of interpretation to do. So sometimes on some topics, the progress is not as fast as we might have hoped, but I think it's always important to prioritize clarity in some cases. We're running a bit early, so I think it might be nice. There aren't any burning questions from the online chat. So I think I will ask if there are colleagues in the room who would like to maybe already ask a question now before the coffee break. And I see we have Rick Clayton from Animal Health Europe who would like to ask a question.
Thank you, Emily. First of all, I'd like to express my thanks to everybody. Really appreciated these updates. But also thanks for the info day. Ivo, it's good to be back, and thanks for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here. As people have already expressed, and I'm sure other people will throughout the next 2.5 days, there has been an enormous amount of work by all stakeholders, the Commission, the EMA, the CVMP, the CMDV, and industry stakeholders. So it's tremendous. We have come a long way. It's been a very bumpy road. We all know that. We've all been saying it. But as it has just been said, we want to focus on the opportunities and the benefits. One of the benefits we want to focus on, well, there's two main ones: reduction in administrative burden and innovation. We think we are slipping away a little bit from some of these objectives. We remain hopeful that we can still stay on track. We're not there yet, as Ivo has said. My question really goes to Alfonso. You mentioned that when the full implementation stage is finished, you might be open to suggestions for improvements. And the question is, what do you mean by when the full implementation stage is finished? Because there could be one or two interpretations on that. That could take us right out to the herbal report in 2027. But I'm interested in this, Alfonso, because we believe that in order to reach that, to fully deliver on that objective of reduced administrative burden, as well as getting all the systems functioning smoothly and perfectly, that we will probably need a couple of changes to the legislation as well. I don't know whether I'd call these mistakes, but mistakes in intent which haven't transpired. I think we will now have to go back and correct. Now we know how things are being implemented. And the classic example is variations not requiring assessment. We now have 30 days to notify to a database, whereas before we had 12 months. Why 30 days? Because, well, we're just notifying to a database. So everyone thought it'd be easy. It's not turning out that way, so we may be asking you to go back. So the question is, really, to get down to the nut of my question, is when will you be ready to start receiving suggestions for legislative improvements? When is the full implementation finished in your view?
Thank you, Rick, for your question. First of all, please allow me to clarify if I didn't express myself correctly. I think that it wasn't my intention to say that once the implementation phase has been completed, we are open to consider amendments to the legislation. What I try to indicate is that when it comes to the practical implementation, some elements might have been identified which might require some improvement, some fine-tuning, but not within the meaning of amending the legislation. So your question is when we can consider that the implementation phase has been completed. I think that one of the elements to be considered there is when all the implementing acts or the delegated acts which have been foreseen by the co-legislators have been put in place, where when all the tools that had been considered in the new legislation are in place to provide their added value. But still, this doesn't prevent all the actors in the regulatory network to try to fine-tune, to try to optimize the practical implementation of the existing legal provisions in the regulation. I think that at this stage, it's too much premature to start considering any kind of legislative amendment to the VMP regulation where we are still in the middle of the full implementation phase. So I apologize if I wasn't clear enough, but it wasn't my intention at all to indicate any, let's say, window opportunity to reopen the legislative or the current legislation in order to fix any element. I was rather referring to the daily practical implementation, and you are working very closely with member states and with EMA colleagues and setting the different processes and procedures to put in place the legal provisions in the legislation. Thank you.
Emily, I forgot to really thank the EMA. I had a long list of thanks, and I only got halfway through it. I also want to express industry's appreciation for the EMA's work here, particularly the training you put in place. But also we reciprocate your feeling on the good collaboration. We really appreciated that with the EMA, with the CVMP, with CMDV. We do feel we are listened to and you respond. We try and give our input when it's needed. The agile structure is a bit more challenging. We all appreciate that. So I just wanted to make sure that that was reciprocated. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I think I think we could possibly take one more question. Is there anyone in the room who would like to put their hand up? I don't see any hands, and we've got. I'll take one question from the chat, only because we can't really give an answer to it. I mean, it's the question about the fees for a particular classification of variation on the alignment of product information to the new QRD template version 9. But the question is rather in respect of national procedures and the fees in member states, and that's not something that we're going to be able to comment on at the EMA Info Day. So we would suggest that you would take that question either directly to the national competent authorities or potentially at an interested parties meeting with the CMDV. So I think with that, and on the positive note from Rick, we can break for coffee, and we are due back at 4 o'clock sharp. So if you could rejoin a few minutes before, and maybe just also take advantage of the coffee break for colleagues online to pop those questions in the chat for us. You've got a very good chance of getting your question through at this moment, so take the opportunity. So we break for coffee and back just before 4 o'clock. Thank you. So welcome back after the coffee break, everybody. And in case there's any new online participants who've joined us, we're in session 1 of the Info Day, and which is on the regulatory policy, and we are coming to our 4th presentation of the session, which is the perspective from industry 1 year into the new veterinary regulation. And this presentation will be given, in fact, by 2 colleagues from the industry. So we have Heidi Schwer and Efke Hausinger. And by way of background, Heidi is a veterinary surgeon by training who has also worked at the Belgian National Agency before starting her own consultancy in regulatory affairs and pharmacovigilance. And Efke has a background in molecular biology and gene therapy and has worked for the industry initially within human health and then followed by animal health. And both of these colleagues are active within their respective industry associations, so Heidi within ABC and Efke within Access VetMed. So Heidi, you are taking the first half of the presentation, so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello. First of all, thank you, Emily, for this introduction, and thank you, EMA, for hosting the event today and tomorrow. And thanks for having us as speakers today. We appreciate it. I'll be indeed presenting the first part today of the industry's perspective, followed by Afke, who will be giving the second part today. So it is important to start off with by saying that this is a joint presentation from the industry, meaning that there are various stakeholders involved in the preparation of all the slides that we are presenting. And that is, apart from my organization, the Association of Veterinary Consultants, also Access VetMed and Animal Health Europe. Also, one comment I still want to make as an introduction is that this presentation is really addressed to the whole European regulatory network, so not just EMA. So it includes the agencies, the national agencies, and also the marketing authorization holders within the EU. Indeed, today's presentation will be about the implementation of the regulation 2019-6 1 year further. And the contents of our presentation will cover the first part about whether we are meeting the objectives. We'll discuss about the new IT systems that we are having to adapt to. Third part or third point, in fact, I have here 5, is the areas that impact the availability most. And the last one, the way forward, and the final remarks. And that will be given by Afghan. So meeting the objectives. Next slide, please. And the next slide.
Heidi, could I kindly ask you to just speak up a little bit louder,
Okay.
if that's okay?
Come closer to the microphone.
Yeah,
Okay.
just put it down.
Okay. Better? Is it better?
Much better. thank
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. So we all realize that enormous efforts have been made by all parties and progress has been booked. However, the implementation of all these new systems within 3 years has proven to be very ambitious, maybe slightly too ambitious even. We do want to start though with some positives, and we have divided them into a few small sub-points. The first being the immediate positives that we are seeing from the regulation, which is, first of all, as one example or a few examples, the deletion of renewals. So we do not have to submit renewal dossiers anymore. Also, the removal of the sunset clause, and at the same time, the possibility to add pictograms on the packaging. This seems to be a quick win, where we believe that this has really delivered some positivity for the companies to lift these requirements. There are some potential positives, however, yet to be delivered or used, which is, and I'm taking an example from the pharmacovigilance side now, that's the removal of the PSUR submissions, that's the periodic safety update reports. Also the extension of the adverse event reporting deadlines, which have been increased significantly. However, we are seeing that these requirements are now replaced by new ones, which we are facing with how to handle these. I'll come back to that later, and of course, this will also be covered by different presentations still. Second bullet point about the some potential is the UPD, which is very much the central point of many of our struggles that we still have these days. There are high expectations, but at present we feel that we are still in the forming and storming phase with the UPD. Third bullet point is the novel therapies, where we've also heard earlier today that in the future there will probably be some possible VMPs registered through these therapies, where we have seen that there are some concept papers published for the bacteriophages and for the cell therapies. So potentially delivering new veterinary medicinal products, but not at this stage. I don't think we are there yet. Not in a long shot, maybe even. There is the vaccines antigen master file and the platform technologies also to mention as hopefully some future or potential positives. And next one is also a positive point, and we actually even put that in capital letters because we see that as something really good. The collaboration we have had with EMA and the national competent authorities and the industries all together. We have seen that EMA has been highly responsive to our question and needs, and this is highly appreciated. However, many challenges do remain. Next slide, please. So where do we stand exactly 1 year following the implementation of the VMR? And for this slide, I'm actually going to dig directly into the VMR, and I'm going to quote verbatim. And I'm reading as it says in the regulation. This regulation aims to. Is it still not?
Let's
No?
try
Okay,
another
it's-
microphone. Let's try another microphone. Is
Okay.
it possible to swap a little bit?
Okay, I'll swap.
Because
okay.
it might not be you, could be the microphone. So
Okay.
there is, because you're not actually. This one. Sorry about this.
Okay, trying again. Is it better? Okay, no problem. So I'm going to actually read the text as it is in the regulation. This regulation aims to reduce the administrative burden, enhance the internal market, and increase the availability of veterinary medicinal products, while guaranteeing the highest level of public and animal health and environmental protection. So coming to the first one, reduce the administrative burden. At the moment, the burden is higher than ever before, and this includes industry, and I'm rather confident to say also regulators. The second one is the enhancement of the internal markets, where we also see that this is not yet happening, and we would need further harmonization. Third point is the increasing of the availability of VMPs. And there we have also not seen any improvements. And this is linked to the first and the second point now. Next slide, please. So proposals were there to establish the European central databases to aim at more efficient regulatory procedures and the exchange of information with regulators and the general public, and also with the veterinarians, maybe I may add. So it was expected that it would be a resource-intensive challenge for both regulators and industry, but the extent of the work was underestimated. However, we do remain optimistic that in the long term it will deliver, and we will have the promise of significant simplification, transparency, and the reduction of the administrative burden. Next slide, please. So is it a future-proof regulation that stands the test of time in the long run? We don't know, but we know that we are not yet there. So the industry would really welcome some visibilization of the progress against these objectives. Is there any progress report to be given? And in this context, I want to mention that industry is willing to collaborate on these areas in identifying the concrete areas, parameters, and metrics to actually help with such a progress report, realizing that this is not something that we will do at this moment or that we can do at this moment in time, but in the future it would be welcome to be able to have some sort of metrics to really measure the objectives against the regulation. Next slide, please. So this brings me to the second section of my presentation, going a bit more into detail in the new IT systems and how we are all adapting to the change, where we are 1 year further, mentioning especially the UPD, the data input, the functionality efforts that have been made. And again, well, also I will also mention a few other databases, of course. And as a third one, the experiences and also expectations that we will have for the future. So the next slide, please. So this is a nice overview page displaying the new IT systems that we are faced with at the moment. So we have 3 new major databases. Having said that, we know that EVVet3 is not totally new. We did have EV Utrovigilance Veterinary in the past, of course, but it does have now the new functionalities, and we have to use it in a different way from the industry side, let's say. So we have also the UPD, and we have IRIS, which is the database which we will be using, or which we are using, of course, already for the signal management and for the signal statements. Apart from that, we do have the subsets to work with of all these databases, or of some of them at least, not of IRIS. We do have the data warehouse to deal with, which is part of the EVWET. We do have the OPAD, VOS, OPAD, AVS. So that's the other post-authorization data database subsets, where for one part we have to give in the volume of sales, and for the other where we have to give in the marketing data in the future. Apart from that, we have the wholesale database, where already a few things were said in previous presentations today. We do also have the other platforms to deal with, which is the SPOR and the OMS, which we have to use, which is even a prerequisite to actually access the other databases. Summarizing all these, this is something new for the companies, and we have to deal with these on a daily basis since January last year. Actually, we do not have to be in IRIS or even in EVWET every day, but it's important to mention that with all the changes also that we've seen, that by the time you may need to enter the system again, there might be a new change requiring again new processes, new procedures from the company, and actually also mentioning that many companies do not have an own IT department that they can rely on, where they can, where you can knock on the door for help with this. So it is really hard for the companies to work around all this with having new procedures written and reorganizing themselves into different departments. And I'm just retaking briefly the initial example I gave about the PSURs, which are not required anymore, but now we do have to enter the sales data in one of the databases. And this may require a different department, a different person, and again, every person using these databases have to get used to them and has to know how to work with them. And this is really time consuming for the companies. So the workload with all this together has really significantly increased, and it's bringing quite some difficulties to work with all these databases on a maybe daily basis, or not even on a daily basis, but to see who needs the access for which and how do we work together. Next slide, please. So going a bit more into detail into UPD again, about the data and functionality efforts that we have seen over the last year. And especially UPD, there have been major efforts for all of us, or from all of us, to bring in the data, especially from the regulators, because it's of course the regulators that have to bring in the product data. So we have seen really a lot of work being shifted during the last 12 months to be able to use the database. So what has been done, data uploads for product information, and the quality has been improved. At the moment, though, we do not have all the product data in UPD yet, and the data is still lacking quality. So we are not there yet. We also would like some functionalities within the UPD which are still missing at this point. I'll come back to that later, and Afke will also go into detail a bit more. We have also seen over the last year that, and this is not only for the UPD, by the way, that with dealing with certain bugs in the systems, it has created other problems, whereby it has made work in it difficult. Also for the data warehouse, for instance, it can be time consuming to wait for the system to react, let's say. Also mentioning briefly still that guidance documents are not always easy to understand, especially for non-technical or IT people. And a last small point here about the late publication sometimes of guidance documents, where we have seen that the publication of such documents is sometimes later than the actually putting into place of the new version of a certain database. So again, in yellow, in the yellow block here, we are again summarizing that the last year has proved to be really highly burdensome for the companies, especially checking the data and especially communicating with the agencies in order to enhance all the data in the UPD. And yes, this is no doubt also a major work for the agency, where they would probably also prefer to use their time differently than just to check the data and to correct the data. So it will still take some time before the industry, the companies are fully confident in all these databases, and most importantly, before we are able to actually be compliant and to fulfill our legal obligations within the VMR. Next slide, please. The third slide on the UPD is briefly giving a few more experiences and expectations for the UPD, where we have one, let's say, large item where the whole industry uses UPD, of course, which is for the variations not requiring assessment. Again, good progress has been made by the companies or by the regulators or by all of us, especially for the, dare I say, more simple variations where not too much supporting documentation is needed. So this is working in a way, but still not all submissions are possible due to current state. So we are waiting for some more improvements there, and we do understand that there are improvements coming for certain groupings, etc., etc. Third point here is again the email communication that we will, or that we at the moment still require between the agency and the companies. More specifically for the notification of the VRNAs, where we do not know is it variation approved or not. So an automatic notification system to come out of it would be really useful and is needed, but it's not functional yet. Second point about the UPD is about the subsets of the volume of sales and the availability status submissions, where we're also seeing that the mapping is highly complex, and at this stage it is very difficult for the companies to really submit the data. So again here, we really need to have the product data complete before we can really get our sales data in the systems properly. We do understand, of course, that the deadlines to submit these data have been extended, but it will still represent for quite some companies an incredible challenge to be able to enter the data by the summer, let's say. Again, support from EMA and the national competent authorities has been very helpful, but we would require, or we would welcome extra training, especially referring to the CSV files, which is at this moment a big topic, let's say, where we are facing many issues to be able to upload those files. It's not working too well. So that would be very helpful. And to sort of finish off with this slide of the UPD, I think we can say that 2022 has been a highly work-intensive year to get sort of the data into the system, especially the product data, to be able to do the VRNAs. and where we are seeing now, from where we stand now at the moment, that probably 2023 will be a challenging year for these subsets of UPD, where we do need to enter the volumes of sales and the marketing status. So this is, and also in fact for the labeling, but this is a topic for AFCA later on. So these seem to be the challenges, especially for this year. Okay, next slide, please. This brings me to my last slide, which I personally think is one of the most important slides, because it really, really depicts very graphically where we are and what we are, because we are all different cogwheels having to intertwine and having to work together in order to get some result. We do have EMA providing the shell, if I may say, and the technicalities. We need the competent authorities to feed the product data, and we need, of course, the companies to also feed the also product data and variation data, etc. And it is clear when we look at this that one cannot work without the other. And I do want to make this point that this is really, and this is why we also say this is a presentation to the whole regulatory network, because it is a new situation. Before the VMR, we did not have all these systems, or differently put, we were not so reliant on all these systems to work properly in order to be compliant. And now we have to work with them, and we are depending one on each other to make this work. So close interaction and teamwork has occurred in the past, but is still needed this year and for the future to come. So a continued good collaboration is still needed for this year and in the long run. So this concludes my presentation, or my part of the presentation, and I will let AFCA now continue. Thank you very much.
Just checking the microphone. Good. Okay, great. Thank you, Heidi and Emily, for the introduction, and EMA and Access VetMed for the opportunity to speak here. I will speak about the areas that impacted availability most. So we've selected the following 4 topics. To save time, I will let you read them yourself, and we can move on to the next slide. So the EU regulatory network has made great efforts to simplify the transition process, but national requirements are still retained by different NCAs. The national laws are not, or not yet, aligned with the new regulation, and some burdensome procedures like mock-up checking are still retained. There are also differences in interpretation of the regulation between NCAs, even within centralized procedures. For example, on how to present the representative for pharmacovigilance and/or representative for the marketing authorization holder, and what their responsibilities are. Also, implementation dates are not aligned across all countries. There is duplication of work. For some countries, there is a separate national reporting system for availability and/or sales data next to the UPD. The hope is that when the section for the reporting of the sales data and availability data in the UPD is fully operational and we can rely on the quality of the information, the NCA's separate requirements for the reporting will not be needed anymore, and we hope that the NCAs will extract the data from the UPD. We appreciate the continued update and improvements that are made to the guidelines, and hope the collaboration between industry and regulators to improve the guidelines will continue. Next slide, please. So there are a few challenges industry would like to address regarding the variations. The shortening, it's been mentioned already, of the notification periods from 12 months to 30 days for a VNRA following implementation unnecessarily increases the time pressure with already stretched resources and it severely limits the ability to group variations. A yearly review and amendment of the list of VNRAs would improve the quality and the implementing regulation. The flexibility is really required during this process. We call to allow presenting VNRAs that are consequential or related to a VRA in a single grouped package. And overall rules for implementation of VRAs need more clarity and flexibility. Next slide, please. So, for regulators and industry, the update to QRD v9 is challenging and resource demanding. To enable the process to run more smoothly, a common implementation of decisions throughout the regulatory network is needed, especially with the implementation of revised packaging. The information on the national reporting systems for adverse events needs considerable simplification. Perhaps a common link in all leaflets to be used for all countries that refer to a central list that contains all national reporting systems could be an option. In section 16 of the leaflet, clarification and alignment is needed regarding the contact details for reporting of suspected adverse events. And the rules for naming, location, and certainly the responsibilities and obligations for local representatives is open for interpretation and is being implemented in different ways throughout the different countries. We also call for harmonized pictograms for the recycling of packaging waste materials. We need more clear guidance and a harmonized approach. Next slide, please. The rules for protection of technical documentation, commonly known as data protection, are new and contain substantial changes for both new MAs and existing MAs. Industry is eager to see how these changes will impact innovation, but also competition, and so the access for users to veterinary medicinal products and generics. Will the promises to incentivize innovation and increase availability be delivered? And how will this be monitored? These and other provisions are part of the updated guidance to applicants that is currently being developed. It is critical for industry to be involved in the update of such guidance at an early stage. We need a level playing field, which will be achieved with transparency and predictability. During tomorrow's presentation, Animal Health Europe will address the impact and possibilities for innovation under the new regulation. Next slide, please. So all topics I've just discussed impact the availability of products. The additional national requirements and the disharmonization between member states increase the workload. The increased administrative burden for the submission of variations and QRD updates require substantial additional resources. Clarity, guidance, and transparent rules will be required to be able to maintain and get timely access to VMPs. A pragmatic approach is needed. Also, the impact of cross-sectorial legislation and the increase in fees further adds on to the cost and resources needed to keep products on the market. The cost of keeping products in compliance may eventually lead to rationalization of portfolios. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. The amount of work, resources, and efforts EMA has put into supporting MAHs with the implementation of the new system is recognized and highly appreciated. We do, however, have a few suggestions which could help us out. A flowchart to navigate the help desk will make searching easier. Please keep published training materials on the EMA website up to date. The release notes are difficult to understand for non-IT people, and as release notes are mainly used by regulatory people, a user-friendly description would be appreciated. As Heidi just mentioned, for the new volume of sales reporting system, instructions for use and additional training are necessary for the completion of the CSV files. Next slide, please. Industry highly appreciates the opportunity that it has been given by the EMA over the years to be involved in the development of the new IT systems. EMA is now shifting to agile methodology through the establishment of dedicated SME groups for the VMP REC project. While this is a great initiative that will drive the project forward, the way of working will be too resource demanding for smaller and not so small MAHs to be able to participate and contribute. Could there be an alternative forum for dialogue between EMA and industry associations? Next slide, please. So final remarks. Overall, the stated objectives and key benefits of the regulation were not met during 2022. It has been a year for adaptation to the new regulation for us all, with several difficulties have arisen. The training provided by EMA has helped industry to get used to the new systems, but it will still take quite some time before we can say with confidence that we trust the databases and that we have well-established procedures to fulfill our legal obligations. Not all issues have been solved, and we would appreciate a continued pragmatic and flexible approach. Question is, should 2023 be another transition year? Next slide, please. We can skip these. Thank you. So, great challenges can either drive people apart or bring them closer together. As I speak for industry, I can say this past year, with all its challenges, has brought industry and regulators closer together. We better understand each other's perspective. There is still a long way to go, but we remain hopeful that we are getting on the right track. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much to both of you for the reflections, some positive and obviously some which reflect the remaining challenges, but thank you very much for putting that on the table. So that concludes the presentations as such, and we're now going to take questions. And I was going to say we're going to open the floor for questions, but you've listened to my plea for questions in the chat, and we now have more questions than I think we can handle. So I think that I will move straight to some of the questions that we've received in the chat, and we'll try and take a selection that cover different areas, because it's quite clear we could spend the rest of the session on the QRD template. But for the benefit of our speakers as well and their experience, we'll try and take a broader range of questions. So we have one quite interesting question from, sorry, I don't think it's the full name, but from somebody, Madens, which is, for novel therapies, considering the lack of knowledge about long-term safety, and especially for those benefiting from limited markets, so that's under Article 23, do you, I assume EMA or CVMP, plan to implement a specific focus for pharmacovigilance? And I'm looking over at Dr. Claassen to answer that question. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that question. Looking at novel therapies, we do recognize that they will not come with extensive experience in the field. Tomorrow we will see a presentation on pharmacovigilance, on signal management, and part of that proposal for signal management is to have targeted signal management. And targeted signal management will focus on new substances. So novel therapies, by definition, are new substances, specifically in the first 5 years that they are on the market, and it could be shorter if we can collect data faster. On top of that, the regulation does provide the opportunity to establish a specific risk management plan for novel therapies. And that risk management plan could focus on a more targeted collection of specific data that could relate both to safety issues, close monitoring of safety issues, as well as looking at the efficacy and efficiency of using those novel therapies in the field. I think with that, probably we would have covered the concerns on not having all the information available at the authorization stage of novel therapies.
Thank you for that. And just to say that there's quite a few questions on pharmacovigilance, and what we will do is we've collected those, but seeing as there is a dedicated presentation tomorrow on pharmacovigilance, we will take the rest of the questions on pharmacovigilance tomorrow. So that's an incentive to join us again tomorrow morning. Question on CVMP guidelines. So this is going to be for you, Johan. And the question is from Mel Munro, and it is following the adoption of the CVMP's reflection paper on promoting the authorization of alternatives to antimicrobials, which was back in 2021. Have there been any further discussions at EMA level or in the network to put in place a set of coordinated actions to promote development authorization? Or I think the question is essentially asking for an update. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And the answer is yes, indeed. We have a number of actions also in the CVMP work plan. The CVMP is, of course, there for scientific guidance, and novel therapies are such a big range of types of products that it is not possible to cover a scientific coherent scientific guidance in one guideline. So we will address product type issues in product type guidelines. The phage therapy guideline is a good example of that. Thank you.
Okay, and one more just before, whilst we stay on the theme of CVMP guidelines, and it's another question from Rick Clayton. I'm not choosing your questions as by favoritism, Rick, but it's a question that will interest everybody, and it is there a delay to the benefit risk guideline? So this is the overarching scientific guideline which explains how we assess benefit risk. And again, for Johan, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, and the answer can be very short and clear. The answer is yes, there is a delay on that, and there's a delay for very good reasons. Thank you.
Yeah, because as I mentioned, there are issues of interpretation, and I think on such a pivotal issue as benefit risk, the thing we will all welcome the most is clarity, and we are very well aware of the principal questions that come from the industry side on this topic, and they are being taken into account in the work. So we have also a Brexit question, and hopefully it's not too political and we don't all start twitching. But it's from Ian Jenkins, and the question is, how is the issue of having products that are authorized in the UK via a single MA, which covers both GB and NI, as well as national NI authorizations being addressed with respect to data being added to the UPD? Currently, the VMD has no access. And I would like to ask if my colleague Jana Szylanski could take that question, please.
Yes, thank you, Emily, and thank you for the question as well. I mean, the brief answer is everything you say there is correct. So yes, MRP DCP products where the UK is a CMS are being added to the UPD, and you've probably seen that. Yes, at the moment, because of Brexit and the discussions that are ongoing there, still the VMD cannot have access to the UPD, so they're being helped out by other member states in entering the data, at least for the MRP DCP products. And I can only add to that the VMD themselves have ultimately decided not to add the national authorizations to the UPD, and there's obviously a limit to what we can do there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we've got a question maybe we can come back to, because I don't want to put Alfonso on the spot, but it's a... Oh, sorry. We have a... We have a raised hand. Okay. So we have a. Okay, so could the colleague who's raised their hand please introduce themselves and ask your question? Thank you. And the colleague is somebody S. Din. If you could be muted, or from their side. So could you? We've unmuted you. Maybe if it's an accidental raised hand, you could always put your question in the chat. So yeah, maybe Alfonso, something for you to think about whether you can say something. Maybe we can come back to it, but it's regarding the timing for the draft delegated act for Article 118. So somebody is just asking about the timeline for that. So maybe we can come back to that if you like towards the end. Yeah. Okay. Okay. There's a question from Giulio Bucci, which is about the implementation dates for variations requiring assessment. And I'm going to say something about that myself, because it is definitely an area where we see a lot of activity at the moment. And it is something, especially on the centralized side, that has changed quite dramatically, actually, in terms of the practical implementation. Because what we now have in Article 68, paragraph 1, is that the Commission decision will include an implementation date for the specific variation. So each VRA has a Commission decision, and each decision has an implementation date. And that process is necessarily one size fits all, because neither the Commission nor the EMA can operate a system of tailored implementation dates within Commission decisions, because we also know that where that would happen, there would be constantly requests to revise that date. So the absolute blanket approach is 6 months for implementation, with the exception that we have managed as a network to negotiate, which is the 12-month implementation period for the VRA GI18 to align with the QRD template version 9. And that is under specific terms and conditions, which is that it can't be if it's grouped, because obviously if there are other variations in that grouping, then the 6 months has to apply to those variations. And on the centralized side, we can't have Commission decisions that say one implementation date for one variation in the grouping and a different date for the other variations. So it has to be a workable system. But the one point in the question from Julia, which I think is a valid point, and I think it should be raised in the fora, especially for the e-application form, is that I think a lot of things have gone wrong since we have put in a fixed date field for the implementation date in the application form, because before it was a free text field, or there was a bit more flexibility. And I think to try and work around this issue, maybe in a future release of the EAF, we need to revert to a free text field, because indeed having to pick a date, especially in the centralized procedure where you don't know exactly when the Commission decision will be issued, is very difficult for applicants. And it is causing issues at validation for the reasons I've outlined, because where we see that the date is quite far ahead in the future, we are raising it with you to say, look, this looks like more than 6 months. But yeah, it is a sore spot at the moment. But I think that we can work on it, and in the EAF we can try to get that field changed. And if there's any colleagues online who are involved in any of the fora for the EAF, then we also welcome your help with that. Okay, I think then we have. Sorry, I'm just looking through the questions. I don't, Alfonso, are you able to comment on the Article 118? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for the question. Well, it's not possible for me to provide a very precise timeline for this, because in fact, once the Commission will adopt the delegated act and it will be submitted to the Parliament and Council for the objection period, we don't really know at this stage whether the objection period will last just 2 months or maybe 4 months. And we don't know whether the outcome of this objection period would be. We have had some experiences in the past where objections have been raised to delegated acts, and then this delays the whole procedure significantly. So what I can say is that the public consultations and the WTO SPS notification have been concluded. We are assessing the feedback provided, and then we are ready to move to the adoption phase in the near future. But then the most crucial and significant procedural step is going to be the objection period by the Council and the Parliament. So depending on how things develop during the objection period, we might have very different scenarios, so better not to speculate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We've had a few questions on reporting the sales volumes in the UPD, and I just wanted to flag that I think my colleague Jana can address that in her presentation tomorrow. Yeah, that will be handled tomorrow morning. So again, another reason to come back. Hopefully we haven't put you off. Right, I think it's unavoidable that we take a question on the QRD template, and I have to credit the colleague from MSD with the longest question in the chat. So thank you, Bernd, for the detailed detailed questions, which we have also discussed bilaterally. So I think I will pick out of those questions the general point of the national reporting systems for pharmacovigilance, because that seems to again be a point that is generating high interest at the moment. And I think one of the messages that we can take and something that we can work on is that, so we have the new Appendix 1, which has simply compiles in one place the national reporting system details for each member state. So this is nothing new. This has existed. It's supposed to be a reference document, as they have exactly on the human side. They have an Appendix 5. It looks exactly the same. But where we think we could maybe make life easier is to ask the member states to review the information that they have to see, can we make it a bit shorter, a bit simpler, because indeed when you're reading it in the leaflet, it can be a bit tiny and a bit crowded. So maybe we need to look at that, and that could be a quick win. With regard to also for the centralized procedure, I'd just like to go back historically, because historically it looks like it wasn't always a requirement for the centralized procedure to include the national reporting system details. But in fact, if we go back in time to the last release of the QRD template, at that time, the system of national reporting systems had not yet fully been put in place. And therefore, it wasn't fair at that time for centralized products where the marketing authorization necessarily covers all member states to impose a requirement when those systems simply didn't exist in some member states yet. So that is the history of why it was slightly more optional for the centralized procedure. At this point in time, we have very clear national reporting systems for each member state, and there is no reason whatsoever why there should not be the same details for a centralized package leaflet as a non-centralized package leaflet. So what that requirement is that where a member state has contact points for national reporting systems, then those are what should be included in the package leaflet as per that member state's requirements. So it's, and those requirements are reflected in the Appendix 1. But we do take on board to see if that information can be streamlined. With regard to the single link, it's something that it's an idea that is worth exploring. It has been explored. We weren't able to take it forwards at the last release of the QRD template, but we do commit to exploring it with the CMDV and see if it's something that we can make steps towards, I would say. So I think that's what we can say about the QRD template today. I'd like to ask if anybody would like to ask any verbal questions online, if anybody would like to raise their hand, or indeed in the room. Okay, none online at the moment. Not.
Just a moment, please, because someone typed something in the Q&A, even though.
Sorry, we're just waiting for.
So this point. Okay. So if you open the Q&A,
Yes, sorry, we're just looking in the Q&A.
and then you see that this point from FE made a comment on Alfonso Eras.
Okay, so we have a question from FVE to Alfonso. Sorry, Katrina, you're going to have to point me in the right direction. Bear with us, sorry.
No,
Just
not
trying
there.
to, we've lost the
Go-
question.
Go to WebEx.
Okay.
Here,
Yes.
Q&A. Here it is. Open this. Long.
Okay, this is a quite a long question, but I think it's interesting. So, and it's directed to our colleague from the Commission, Alfonso. So I will read it out. So first of all, it's thank you for the interesting presentation and for all the work you have done to address the issues that came up during the implementation of the new rules. In particular, the one related to the infamous, sorry, that's my word, Article 152. One other important issue has to do with implementation of Article 106.1, stipulating that veterinary medicinal products shall be used in accordance with the terms of the marketing authorization. This provision reduces, well, I would say reduces flexibility, but rather does not allow veterinarians to deviate from the terms of authorization as regards the dose administration. And I think the question is a bit longer, and I think it's making reference to the fact that deviations from the SPC are possible under the cascade. And I think the question concludes with the fact that this issue is very important for veterinarians in the field, and could the Commission apply a similar approach as for the Article 152 to solve the issue with Article 106? I could certainly comment on that, but I don't. Alfonso, is this something you're happy to take? Yes, I'll hand over.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you to FE colleagues for raising this question, which is not new to us, indeed. So, as a vet, I may understand the concerns of colleagues, but I could not make any parallel comparison with Article 152 because the provisions in Article 106.1 are not a mistake at all. This is the deliberate choice of the co-legislator. And to some extent, I think that questioning that article means putting in question the basic principles of the whole authorization system. VMPs are regulated products which have to be subject to prior authorization before they can be placed on the market and used. And the marketing authorization is granted on the basis of the information provided by the applicant. Clear intended uses, clear dosage regimes, clear efficacy, which is demonstrated for the information which has been provided. So if we had to change the VMP regulation to give a kind of free pass to vets to use the products as they want, that could be a kind of completely breaking new approach, because also for industry, when it comes to advertising, they have to stick to what is in the SPC, to what is in the product authorization. They can deviate even if they knew that this could be efficacious for this or for that. So I think that questioning this is like putting in question the whole authorization system. And for the time being, I can confirm that there is no intention within the Commission services to revise this provision. I would like to add that we have the cascade articles which allow, where relevant and when with very clear, let's say, conditions to deviate from the marketing authorization conditions in a given product. But again, I would not make any comparisons to the issue and the approach that that happened with Article 152. And just a last remark regarding maybe some old products for which there could be a need to update dosage regimes or information. The VMP regulation foresees other legal instruments to try to address that problem. But I think that in order to address a very punctual or well identified and targeted problem, we cannot open Pandora's box. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfonso. Yeah, there's definitely some Pandora's boxes around at the moment. So I think I'm going to take one last question from the chat, and it's going to be for Ivo. It's from AVC and a colleague from ABC, Rima Ishimbaeva. Sorry if I didn't pronounce your name properly. And it said, during the previous Vet Info Day 2022, EMA announced its intention to hold the next Information Day in person. Is it still in your agenda for the next Info Day in 2024?
No, thank you very much for that question. I already highlighted in my introduction today in the beginning of the meeting that it's good to see people in person again. I was quite optimistic in 2022 in saying that we would do it in 2023 already. At this moment, the policy of the agency, the return to office policy and the return to having face-to-face meeting in the agency building is that for the working parties, we have one annual meeting for face-to-face meetings. They can have everything else in virtual meetings. For the committees, all the committees that support the work of the agency, we have alternating meetings, one face-to-face meeting and then the next month a virtual meeting, and alternating them through the year. So we've reduced the number of face-to-face meetings by 50%. And also, and that's the policy we still have in place, we've decided that we will not organize large-scale meetings for industry stakeholders. That meeting is that policy is going to be revised, hopefully somewhere halfway this year. But until summer, this is where we are. So I hope that with the pandemic, let's say slowing down, and you can see before we used to have mouth masks here and keeping distances, not sitting too close to each other. That all has changed. That after summer this year, we will also be able to host bigger meetings for industry stakeholders. So that would mean 2024 would be indeed an excellent opportunity to once again organize those big meetings. We have a bigger facility here where we can host easily up to 150, 200 people for a single meeting. And then we could go back to the format that we were used to when we were in London. And that would facilitate participation in person. Very likely it will be a hybrid meeting still to also allow people to remotely participate. But yes, it is my intent to have bigger face-to-face meetings, info day meetings in the coming years.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, I've got two hands up within the room. So we have Elsa, Vecino, and Rick. So I'll let you fight over it. Elsa, ladies first.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to follow up because there were two issues in the industry presentation for which there was a request for feedback. And even if I have the feedback, because indeed during coffee breaks I have been able to get the feedback, but probably the audience would like to know from regulators. The points were, first of all, regarding the review of the guidance to applicants, previously noticed to applicants, if there is an opportunity for consultation. As we know, this is really the day-to-day document that the industry is working with. So if a consultation period could be foreseen. And secondly, there's been along the presentation a request for metrics for monitoring the deliveries of the regulation with objective parameters. I think we have discussed that in various forums, and we know there are plans, but maybe Ivo also wants to briefly touch on that, just because the issues were in the presentation and I don't think these have been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsa. So maybe Alfonso, if you can take the first question for the guidance to applicants, and then Ivo. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Elsa, for the question. So, as far as I know, this is the practice which had been followed in the past. In principle, there is no consultation foreseen for the guidance to applicants.
I will take the next question. Yeah, indeed, I think we should look at is the regulation delivering on its objectives? And we all know what these objectives are. I'm not going to repeat them here. We started discussions last year. Rick was involved in that as well at the stakeholder meeting under the French presidency in Saint-Malo. Because looking at, okay, what is the sort of metrics that we should collect there? We can look at number of products that are being submitted. We can look at availability. We can look at innovation. Are new innovative products coming to the market? Those are probably the easy metrics to go for. Then the less easy metrics are: is it indeed a reduction in administrative burden? Because I don't think we've ever measured it before, but it could be if you really see that you need more staff to deal with the same product portfolio on the side of the regulators or on the side of the marketing authorization holders, that could be an indication. We should not forget that the phase that we're in is still a phase where we are working on things that are a one-time exercise. So updating QAD templates, making sure that things work. So it may be too early to call the shots on is it really reducing administrative burden. I think we have to look beyond the phase where we've done most of that work. In terms of availability, and we discussed it during the coffee break briefly, if the outcome of the new regulation is that indeed it leads, as has been presented by the industry, if it leads to a rationalization of the product portfolio, I can't say if it's a bad thing or if it's a good thing, but if that rationalization then ultimately leads to availability issues for certain markets, shortages, then obviously we would all agree that it's not the best outcome. It's not what we were hoping for. I'm not going to promise anything, but I think mid-2024 would be a good time to organize a meeting and to say, okay, 2 years into the regulation, 2.5 years into the regulation, what has it delivered? Reduction of AMR, innovation, availability, reduction of regulatory and administrative burden. So we have to start collecting those metrics. And maybe now is the time that we should indeed organize ourselves to say, okay, this is the type of metrics that we are going to collect. And I know Rick has challenged me on that already a few times, and we all have good intentions, Rick, but I'm going to use the excuse that the industry uses. We've been so busy with the actual implementation that we're forgetting about all these things. I hope that answers your question, Elsa.
Thank you, Ivo. We're a few minutes over time, so we're going to need to close, but I know, Rick, you wanted to intervene, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Emily, and it's not a long intervention. But just to react to Alfonso, industry may find it difficult to understand why a notice to applicants can be written without talking to the applicants. I mean, conceptually, that's quite challenging. But the original reason I put my hand up was concerning the live event or potential for a live event in 2024. And just to add to what Ivo said, I think all of industry wants to get back to a live event. And if we do, Animal Health Europe is prepared to commit to organising an evening networking event again. I think this is an important part and well appreciated part of the whole experience. So just to confirm, but that would of course require bringing back in a certain cost to the delegates.
Thank you, Rick, and something to look towards for next year. So I'm going to wrap up now because we're just slightly over, and yeah, we've reached the end of the session 1. And I would like to very much thank the speakers for their time and contributions, because all of which, and I think hearing from the 4 different perspectives, it helps to paint a picture of what it's been like in the years leading up to and the first year of the regulation. And philosophically, and I think it's been alluded to, we're all somewhat on the change curve when it comes to dealing with the concepts and processes. And I think we can sometimes daily move backwards and forwards through the different phases of that change curve. When we encounter some of the obstacles and challenges. But I was wisely told by my first mentor when I started working in this field 22 years ago, and he said to me, "Emily, there are no emergencies in regulatory affairs." So I will leave you with that thought, which I think, with hindsight, largely holds true, because we are resourceful in animal health, and I think there's always a workaround. And when we pull together, we do all reach the solution in a good way. So thanks again to the speakers. Tomorrow we will resume at 9 o'clock for session 2, which is on procedural developments. That will start with clarifications on actions for industry, followed by pharmacovigilance, an industry perspective, and then a further industry perspective on innovation. So do join us tomorrow morning. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.